Hey everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. In this video I will be analyzing why Carl Jung thought that the unconscious was so important. Before we begin, I would like to say that if you're as interested as me in the ideas of Carl Jung, then please also subscribe to this channel. I'll be making a lot of videos about him in the future as well. And if there is a certain idea of Carl Jung that you would like for me to discuss, then please let me know in the comments as well. In a previous video, I've already discussed the more negative effects arising from the existence of the unconscious. As Carl Jung observed mostly in his book Aion, unconscious forces can have such a powerful influence on our conscious mind that it is even possible to argue that we do not possess free will. And this is the case because the conscious part of ourself, which is the ego, is under great influence from these unconscious forces which from the perspective of the conscious mind, so the ego, come from the outside. However, as Carl Jung observed as well, these unconscious forces do not necessarily have to be negative forces. In fact, these unconscious forces can be extremely important for our balance and well-being, according to Carl Jung. In this video, we will discuss the importance of these unconscious forces further. And although we are often unaware of these unconscious forces, Carl Jung believed that it is possible to integrate these unconscious forces, thereby making them conscious and therefore internalizing them. According to Carl Jung, this can be extremely important because without doing so, this can even lead to mass hysteria. He wrote, for example, the ever-widening split between the unconscious and conscious increases the danger of physic infection and mass psychosis. With the loss of symbolic ideas, the bridge to the unconscious is broken down. Instinct no longer affords protection against unsound ideas and empty slogans. Rationality without tradition and without a basis in instinct is proof against no absurdity. We can then prevent this ever-widening split between the conscious and the unconscious through assimilating these unconscious forces. Carl Jung wrote that the more numerous and the more significant the unconscious contents which are assimilated to the ego, the closer the approximation of the ego to the self, even though this approximation must be a never-ending process. So fundamentally, by letting these two parts of yourself communicate with each other better, you can prevent a split occurring from within yourself. Would then have the benefit that we are more integrated in our actions and can therefore also increase our level of free will, so to speak. However, according to Carl Jung, there's another, perhaps even more important benefit to our unconscious and to us paying more attention to our unconscious. Therefore, he wrote, "It is in fact one of the most important tasks of physic hygiene to pay continual attention to the symptomatology of unconscious contents and processes, for the good reason that the conscious mind is always in danger of becoming one-sided, of keeping to well-worn paths and getting stuck in blind alleys." In the Red Book, which is perhaps my most favorite book of all time, Carl Jung argued that chaos is just as important as order, and both are necessary in order to find true meaning. He wrote, "You open the gates of the soul to let the dark flood of chaos flow into your order and meaning. If you marry the ordered to the chaos, you produce the divine child, the supreme meaning beyond meaning and meaninglessness." Moreover, Carl Jung also argued that all the unconscious forces that are suppressed for too long will only grow in strength and will still come to the surface eventually. In addition to these unconscious forces, he wrote, for example, "The will can only control them in part. It may be able to suppress them, but it cannot alter their nature. And what is suppressed comes up again in another place in an altered form, but this time loaded with a resentment that makes the otherwise harmless natural impulse our enemy." So as you may have seen from these previous quotes, Carl Jung argued that the unconscious has a certain important compensating function. And the more that these unconscious forces are suppressed, the less that they can succeed in playing this compensatory role between chaos and order. Carl Jung observed that the more complicated our lives become, the less we pay attention to our unconscious. However, it is precisely at these moments that our unconscious also grows in importance, because it has to play this compensating role. Carl Jung wrote that the more civilized, the more unconscious and complicated a man is, the less he is able to follow his instincts. His complicated living conditions and the influence of his environment are so strong that they drown the quiet voice of nature. I believe that our societies play an important role in quieting this voice of nature and thereby neglecting the importance of our unconscious. As you may have seen in my previous video, Henry David Thoreau in his book Walden, for example, argued that we attach too much value to our possessions and our role in society, so too much attention to our conscious behavior. For Henry David Thoreau wrote, for example, "But lo, men have become the tools of their tools. The man who independently plucked his fruit when he was hungry has become a farmer, and he who stood under a tree for shelter, a housekeeper. We now no longer camp as for a night, but have settled down on earth and forgotten heaven." Such, instead of this quiet voice of nature being ever present in our lives, it is drowned by our society with an overemphasis on conscious thoughts and beliefs. Such, Carl Jung wrote, "Opinions, beliefs, theories and collective tendencies appear in its stead and back up all the aberrations of the conscious mind." I believe that as our societies continue to develop, these tendencies appear to become stronger as well, making the role of the unconscious as a compensating factor increasingly more important. Carl Jung also believed that we should not merely accept the positive notions of the unconscious, but should also accept the more negative aspects of the unconscious. This is important according to Carl Jung because by paying attention to them, we can also negate the evil forces lurking within the unconscious. This is important because, as I mentioned before, the less we leave our unconscious in the dark, the less it will be able to control us. Therefore, Carl Jung wrote, "Today, as never before, it is important that human beings should not overlook the danger of the evil lurking within them. It is unfortunately only too real, which is why psychology must insist on the reality of evil and must reject any definition that regards it as insignificant or actually non-existent." Jung believed that the unconscious does not differentiate between good and evil and is not even able to make such a differentiation. It does not know what is good and what is evil in the conscious world. Jung wrote that inside the psychological realm, one honestly does not know which of them predominates in the world. We hope merely that good does, i.e. what seems suitable to us. This is the case because, as Friedrich Nietzsche argued as well, good and evil are socially constructed. Carl Jung wrote that no one could possibly say what the general good might be. As a result, it is up to the conscious mind to decide what is good and evil. If it has integrated the unconscious forces to a considerable degree, it will be able to make a conscious decision as to which of these unconscious forces are good and which are evil. And it is, according to Carl Jung, paramount to pay attention to both. As a discussion on the importance of the unconscious, I would also like to shortly discuss Joseph Campbell. Joseph Campbell, in our modern age, we lack myths and mysteries that used to play an important role in providing meaning, significance, and a sense of heroism to our lives. Similarly to Carl Jung, in his book The Hero with a Thousand Faces, Joseph Campbell argued that an exploration of the unconscious is extremely important. That the hero deed to be wrought today is not what it was in the century of Galileo, where then there was darkness, now there is light, but also where light was, there is now darkness. The modern hero deed must be that of questing to bring to light again the lost Atlantis of the coordinated soul. Thereby, Joseph Campbell attached importance to an individual's exploration of the unconscious that transcends the individual. That this relates nicely to Carl Jung. Carl Jung implied this as well by arguing that the conflicts arising within an individual through an unconscious mind that is not brought to light will be projected upon the world, and therefore impact the world in its entirety and not just the individual. It is not only important for an individual, him or herself, to discover the unconscious, because it is a compensating force between chaos and order. It is also important for the world and society in general. Therefore, Carl Jung wrote that the psychological rule says that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. That is to say, when the individual remains undivided and does not become conscious of his inner opposite, the world must perforce act out the conflict and be torn into opposing halves. As I mentioned in the beginning of this video, Carl Jung even argued that if a group of individuals or an entire society, or perhaps even the entire world, loses touch with the unconscious world, mass hysteria can be the outcome. This, according to Carl Jung, because in the past, symbols such as myths and mysteries functioned as an important link between the conscious and unconscious world. And as Joseph Campbell observed as well, these symbols are slowly eroding. As a result, these symbols no longer protect the mind against dangerous ideas. At the same time, an ever-increasing breakdown of traditions, as we are seeing today, plays a role in this development as well, according to Carl Jung. He wrote, "Loss of roots and lack of tradition neuroticize the masses and prepare them for collective hysteria." Moreover, Carl Jung believed that materialism only further fuels this development, and that in response to this mass hysteria, liberties are slowly abolished. That collective hysteria calls for collective therapy, which consists in abolition of liberty and terrorization. Where rationalistic materialism holds sway, states tend to develop less into prisons than into lunatic asylums. I hope I've been able to make clear that the unconscious is a double-edged sword. So on the one hand, if it is not integrated, it will have an overwhelming power over the ego and thereby limit our free will. On the other hand, if our unconscious is successfully integrated, it is a powerful compensating force. Jung argued that every individual can make his or her own choice in accepting the need of becoming aware of one's unconscious mind. However, he wrote, if he voluntarily takes the burden of completeness on himself, he need not find it happening to him against his will in a negative form. To Carl Jung, if an individual does not recognize the importance of the unconscious, this can have some serious negative consequences, not only for the individual, but for the entire world. We can actually integrate these unconscious forces, according to Carl Jung, will be the topic of a future video. So in case you do not want to miss this future video, then also please subscribe to this YouTube channel. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions or if you would like to add something to this discussion, then please let me know as well. So thank you, and I hope to see you in the next video.